She shouldn't have survived. How an elderly woman endured Yakutia's. The thermometer read -71 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, steel becomes brittle and can shatter. Tires crack like dried clay. The moisture in your breath freezes instantly, falling to the ground as tiny crystals the locals call the whisper of stars. If you step outside without proper covering, your exposed skin will develop frostbite in under a minute. Your lungs will burn as if you are breathing fire, not ice. The cold does not feel cold anymore. It feels like pain, pure and absolute, and in a small wooden house, in a village that most maps do not bother to name. An elderly woman was preparing her morning tea. She was 73 years old. She had lived through winters like this one for her entire life. She had buried a husband, raised children, watched grandchildren grow, all in a place where the temperature drops to levels that should make human habitation impossible. She should not have survived. By every measure of modern comfort, by every standard of what we consider livable conditions, she should not have been there at all. But she was. And she was not merely surviving. She was living with a fullness and contentment that many people in heated apartments never find. Tonight, as you settle into warmth, as your body relaxes into whatever comfort surrounds you, we travel to the coldest inhabited place on Earth, not to frighten you with the cold, but to share something remarkable about human resilience, about the knowledge that accumulates over generations, about what it means to live in partnership with an environment that seems determined to kill you. This is a story told slowly, meant to accompany your drift toward sleep. Let it wrap around you like the furs that kept her warm, layer after layer, until you are held completely Yakutia. The name itself sounds like wind across frozen plains. Yakutia. 4 syllables that contain a world most people cannot imagine. It is a republic within Russia, larger than Argentina, larger than Kazakhstan, one of the largest administrative regions on Earth, and one of the most sparsely populated. In winter, which lasts from October to April, temperatures regularly drop below -50 degrees Celsius. The record, set in the village of Oymyakon in 1933, was -67.7 degrees. Though locals insist it has been colder, that the thermometers simply were not there to measure. Here is something that should make you pause. People have lived in Yakutia for thousands of years, not visited, not passed through, lived generation after generation, raising families, building communities, developing cultures as rich and complex as any on Earth. They did this without central heating, without insulated walls, without the synthetic materials that modern cold weather gear depends upon. They did it with fire, with fur, with knowledge passed from grandmother to granddaughter, from grandfather to grandson. They did it because they learned over centuries, over millennia, how to work with the cold instead of against it. The woman we follow tonight, let us call her Akulina, for that was a common name among the Yakut people of her generation. Akulina was born in 1931 in a village along the Indigirka River, one of the great waterways that flow north through Yakutia to the Arctic Ocean. She was born in a wooden house, heated by a single iron stove, into a family that had lived in this region for as long as anyone could remember. Her first breath was of air so cold it would have killed an unprepared outsider. But she was not unprepared. She was born into knowledge. Perhaps you have experienced cold, real cold, not just the chill of a winter morning in a temperate place, but cold that feels like it is trying to reach inside you. Cold that seems personal, malevolent. If you have felt that, multiply it again, and you begin to approach what Akulina knew as ordinary. But here's what is interesting. She did not experience it as suffering, at least not most of the time. She experienced it as her world, the only world she knew, with its own beauty, its own rhythms, its own gifts. The first lesson Akulina learned about cold was that it had sounds. At -40, trees crack and pop as the sap inside them freezes and expands. The sound echoes across the frozen landscape like distant gunshots, startling if you do not know what it is, but familiar as birdsong to those who grew up hearing it. At -50, your own breath makes a sound when it freezes, a soft crackling, like Rice Krispies in milk. The locals call this sound by different names, but all of them recognize it as the voice of deep winter at -60 and below. The cold itself seems to hum, a low vibration that may be real or may be the mind's way of processing an environment beyond its usual range. Akulina said she could feel this hum in her chest, like a second heartbeat. The sounds of cold, the voices of winter. These were her lullabies as a child. The cracking of frozen wood, the whisper of crystallizing breath, the deep silence that falls when even the wind stops moving. We fear what we do not know. But Akulina knew the cold the way you know your own home. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the windows. Familiar, understood, part of her. Her house was not what you might imagine. The traditional Yakut dwelling was called a balagan, a low structure of wooden logs, the gaps sealed with a mixture of clay and horse dung that hardened in the cold. The roof was covered with bark and earth, creating insulation that kept the warmth in and the cold out. There were no windows on the coldest sides. The walls were thick, sometimes a meter or more. The door was small and low, requiring you to duck as you entered, minimizing the amount of warm air that escaped each time someone came or went. Inside, the temperature might be 40 or 50 degrees warmer than outside. Still cool by modern standards, but warm enough for life, warm enough for comfort, warm enough to sleep without freezing. The heart of the house was the stove, not like a modern stove, but a massive structure of brick or clay, positioned at the center of the living space. It was fed constantly during winter, consuming enormous quantities of wood, radiating heat in all directions. The warmest spots were near the stove. The coldest were in the corners, far from the fire, where frost sometimes formed on the inner walls, even as the family slept at night. The family arranged themselves by need. The very old and very young slept closest to the warmth. The healthy adults took the cooler positions. It was not discussed. It was simply understood. The heat was shared according to vulnerability. Perhaps You have adjusted a thermostat, turned up the heat when you felt cold, turned it down when you felt too warm. Imagine instead that the heat in your home was alive, that it required constant attention, that maintaining it was a daily negotiation between effort and comfort. Akulina learned to tend the fire before she learned to read. She knew by the sound and smell of the burning wood whether the stove was too hot or not hot enough. She could judge the temperature inside the house by how far the frost had crept from the corners. This was not hardship to her. This was simply life. The same way you learn to flip a switch or push a button. She learned to read a fire, but the house was only part of the equation. No one survived Yakutian winters by staying inside. There were animals to tend, water to fetch, wood to gather, 1,000 tasks that required venturing out into cold that would kill the unprepared in minutes. And this is where the true knowledge lived, the knowledge that had accumulated over countless generations, the knowledge that made survival possible. Akulina carried this knowledge in her body, in her habits, in her bones. The first rule was simple: never rush. In extreme cold, sweat is death. If you exert yourself, if you work too hard or move too fast, you sweat. And when you stop moving, that sweat freezes. It freezes against your skin, stealing your heat, turning your own body against you. Akulina moved through winter like water, slowly, steadily, without urgency. Every motion was deliberate. Every task was paced to avoid perspiration. Watching her work was like watching a meditation. There was no wasted movement, no hurrying, no panic, just calm, continuous action in harmony with the cold. The second rule: layers, but the right layers. Not just any clothing would do. The materials mattered, the order mattered, the fit mattered against the skin. Soft fur, the fine undercoat of reindeer, which trapped air and wicked moisture away from the body. Over that, a layer of wool or woven fabric for additional insulation. Over that, the outer garments, heavy fur coats and pants, often made from reindeer hide with the fur still attached, sometimes from wolf or fox or bear. The outer layer had to be loose. Air was the insulator, not the material itself. If the clothing was too tight, it compressed the fur, eliminated the air pockets, lost the warmth. Akulina's winter clothing weighed many kilograms. It made movement slower, more deliberate, which was fine, because you were not supposed to move quickly anyway. Putting it on took time. Removing it took time. Every journey outside was a process, a ritual almost, preparing the body for battle with the cold. And the face. The face required special attention. Breath would freeze on facial hair, on eyelashes, on the edges of any covering. It would build up into ice, which would melt when you came inside, soaking the fabric, making it useless for the next trip out. Akulina knew how to breathe through her layers, how to keep her face warm without creating ice, how to manage the moisture that was the constant enemy of winter survival. If you have ever struggled to get a child into a snowsuit, if you have ever felt the frustration of zippers and gloves and boots that take longer to put on than the outdoor activity you were planning, Multiply that by a lifetime, and you begin to understand what dressing for Yakutian winter meant. But Akulina did not find it frustrating. She found it necessary, like breathing, like eating. It was simply what you did, what you had always done, what everyone you knew had always done. Let your body relax now. Let the tension in your shoulders ease. We are only beginning this journey, and there is no need to hold yourself tight. The story will still be here, unfolding slowly, like Akulina putting on her layers, one at a time, careful and complete. Let us try to understand what extreme cold actually feels like, not from imagination, but from description, from the words of those who have lived it. At minus 20 degrees Celsius, which seems very cold to most people, the experience is sharp but manageable. The air bites at exposed skin. The nose hairs freeze with each inhale, a strange crackling sensation that is uncomfortable but not painful. Your eyes water, and the tears threaten to freeze. But you can stay outside for hours if you are properly dressed. This is where most cold weather experience ends. People in temperate climates might encounter minus 20 a few times in their lives and consider it extreme. In Yakutia, minus 20 is autumn. Barely worth noticing, a hint of what is to come. At minus 40, everything changes. The air becomes thick, dense with cold. It feels like you are breathing something solid. Each inhale burns in the lungs, not from heat, but from the shock of temperature difference. Exposed skin does not just feel cold. It hurts, a deep, aching pain, as if the cold is reaching into your flesh, searching for your warmth, trying to steal it. The sounds are different. Your footsteps crunch with a particular pitch. The snow squeaks beneath your boots. Trees crack in the distance. Everything is louder, sharper, more distinct. At minus 40, you understand that you are in an environment that is actively hostile, that will kill you if you make mistakes, that requires constant attention. At minus 50, the world becomes strange. The cold creates optical illusions. Light bends through air layers of different temperatures. Things appear where they are not. Distances become impossible to judge. Sound travels oddly. Voices carry for miles, but also seem to come from wrong directions. The acoustic landscape shifts and warps. Your body begins to behave unexpectedly. Joints stiffen even through clothing. Fingers become clumsy inside mittens. The face loses feeling even when covered. At minus 50, you measure time outside in minutes. Even brief exposures require recovery. The cold accumulates in your body and takes time to release. At minus 60 and below, you enter territory that few humans have experienced. The cold becomes absolute, overwhelming, almost mystical in its intensity. The moisture in your exhaled breath freezes instantly, creating a cloud of ice crystals that falls to the ground with a soft, hissing sound. The Yakut call this the whisper of stars, and it is beautiful, even as it signals conditions that can kill in moments. Metal becomes dangerous to touch. It will freeze to your skin instantly, ripping flesh away if you try to pull free, even through gloves. You can feel the hungry cold of metal surfaces. The inside of your nose freezes solid. You must breathe through your mouth, through layers of fabric, warming the air before it reaches your lungs. Otherwise, the cold would damage the delicate tissue inside you. At -60, you understand why the ancient peoples believed the cold had a spirit. It feels alive. It feels intentional. It feels like something watching, waiting, patient and eternal. Akulina knew all these temperatures intimately. She had felt the progression from cold to colder to coldest, had learned to read the quality of the cold by how it felt against her face, had developed an internal thermometer more accurate than any instrument. At -40, she would think about which tasks required doing outside and which could wait. At -50, she would delay anything that was not urgent, would check on the horses and retreat inside. At -60, she would not go out at all except for necessity. The fire would be fed heavily. The family would stay close together. The world outside would be surrendered to the cold until it released its grip. The warming was almost as difficult as the cold itself. When you come inside from extreme cold, the warmth is painful. Your frozen extremities burn as blood returns. The nerves wake up and scream. Frostbitten skin turns from white to red to angry purple. Blisters may form as the damage reveals itself. The healing takes days or weeks, and sometimes the damage is permanent. You cannot warm too quickly. That causes more damage. The transition from cold to warm must be managed carefully, gradual, patient. Akulina knew this rhythm, the slow return to warmth after venturing out, the careful attention to fingers and toes and face, the patience required to let the body recover. Perhaps you have experienced cold that hurt. Perhaps you have felt your fingers ache as they warmed, or your ears burn when you came inside from winter weather. If so, multiply that sensation many times. Extend it across every exposed surface, and you begin to approach what Akulina knew as routine. But here is what is interesting. She did not experience the cold primarily as suffering. Yes, it was uncomfortable. Yes, it required constant attention. Yes, it could kill and sometimes did. But it was also beautiful. The crystalline clarity of the air, the diamond sparkle of snow in starlight, the aurora dancing overhead in colors that warmer latitudes never see. It was also familiar. The sensations she had known since birth, the sounds and sights and feelings that meant home. The cold was not foreign to her. It was her world, and it was also meaningful. The cold demanded the best of her. It required her to be alert, capable, present. It did not allow laziness or inattention. It made her more fully herself. This is perhaps the strangest thing about extreme conditions. They can become not just tolerable, but beloved. The people who live in the coldest places do not all dream of tropical beaches. Many of them love their cold world, feel lost in warmer climates, return home with relief when they have traveled. The cold shaped them, and they cannot imagine being shaped any other way. Akulina rarely left Yakutia. Once, in her middle years, she traveled to Moscow to visit a grandchild who had moved there. The warmth was disorienting. The crowds were overwhelming. The buildings pressed in from all sides. She missed the cold. She missed the space. She missed the clarity that only frozen air provides. She came home with relief, with gratitude, with the recognition that her place was her place, that she belonged where she belonged, that the cold had claimed her, and she did not wish to be released. The clothing that kept Akulina alive deserves to be understood in detail. It was not simply clothing, it was technology, refined over thousands of years, passed down through generations of makers, each one adding their knowledge to what came before. The inner layer was the most critical. Against the skin, where sweat could become deadly, Akulina wore garments made from the softest fur available, the undercoat of reindeer, the delicate belly fur of hare, materials so soft they felt like wearing air. These inner garments were loose, allowing circulation, allowing the skin to breathe. They wicked moisture away from the body, carrying it outward to where it could evaporate or freeze harmlessly. The stitching on these garments was invisible from outside, done with sinew thread that would not rot, that would flex with movement without breaking. Every seam was sealed with a special technique that prevented cold air from penetrating. Akulina learned to make these garments as a child, sitting beside her mother and grandmother, watching their hands move with practiced speed, absorbing knowledge that could not be taught in words. The middle layers provided insulation, wool, when they could get it, woven into fabric that trapped air while allowing moisture to pass through, or layers of lighter fur, squirrel or fox, adding warmth without excessive weight. The art was in the layering. Too few layers and you froze. Too many and you sweated, which led to freezing later. The perfect balance depended on the temperature, the activity, the individual body. Akulina knew her own needs precisely. She could gauge the temperature by feel and know exactly how many layers she required. This was not guessing. It was knowledge, built from a lifetime of paying attention. The outer layer was the shield, heavy fur coats that reached past the knees, made from reindeer hide with the fur still attached. The fur faced outward, catching snow and ice that would otherwise melt against the body. These coats were works of art, each one unique, decorated according to family tradition, with patterns that meant something, that told stories about the wearer. Akulina's winter coat had been made by her mother, from reindeer her father had hunted. The decorations showed her family's symbols, her village's patterns, her place in a web of relationships that stretched back generations. She wore her identity as well as her warmth. The boots were crucial. Feet were the most vulnerable to cold, the furthest from the heart, the first to freeze. Keeping feet warm could mean the difference between life and death. Traditional Yakut boots were made from reindeer leg hide, which was naturally water-resistant. They were lined with dried grass or fur, providing insulation that no modern material has surpassed. The boots came up past the knee, overlapping with the coat. No gap where cold could enter. The entire body wrapped in continuous protection. Akulina had many pairs of boots, some for ordinary cold, some for extreme cold, some for wet conditions in autumn. Each type had its purpose, its proper use, its place in the seasonal rotation. The hands required special attention, mittens rather than gloves, because fingers together generate more warmth. The outer mittens were large enough to pull hands inside if they grew too cold, creating a pocket of warmth around curled fists. For work that required dexterity, there were thinner inner gloves that could be worn alone briefly, but only briefly. Exposed fingers would become useless within minutes in extreme cold. Akulina had learned to do most tasks with mittened hands, awkward at first, but eventually natural. The mittens became extensions of her body, tools she wielded without thinking. The face was the greatest challenge. You cannot wrap your face in fur and still see, still breathe. The face must be exposed to some degree, and the face freezes fast. Traditional face coverings were made from soft fur, designed to wrap around the mouth and nose while leaving the eyes clear. The breath passed through the fur, warming slightly before reaching the lungs. The moisture froze in the fur rather than on the skin, but the fur became heavy with ice over time. A face covering worn for hours accumulated pounds of frozen breath. It had to be beaten clean, dried by the stove, made ready for the next venture out. Akulina's eyelashes would freeze together in the deepest cold. She learned to blink regularly, to break the ice before it sealed her eyes shut. This became automatic, a rhythm as natural as breathing. The preparation of these materials was women's work, not because men could not do it, but because traditions divided labor in ways that had proven effective over centuries. Women prepared the hides, sewed the garments, passed the skills to daughters. The process was elaborate. Fresh hides had to be cleaned, scraped of fat and membrane, stretched to dry without freezing brittle, then softened with special treatments, worked until they were supple enough to sew. The tools were simple but precise. Scrapers made from stone or bone or metal, needles carved from bone, thread made from sinew, dried and split until it was fine enough to pass through tiny holes. Akulina spent countless hours at this work. Her hands knew the feel of properly prepared hide, could detect flaws that eyes might miss. The quality of the garment depended on the quality of this preparation, and the quality of the preparation depended on skill accumulated over a lifetime. Perhaps you have worn something handmade, something that someone created specifically for you, with care and skill and attention. If so, you understand something of what Akulina felt when she put on her winter clothes. Each garment connected her to the hands that made it, to the animals that provided it, to the generations who had developed the techniques. She was wrapped in relationship as much as in warmth. Modern synthetic materials have advantages. They are lighter, more consistent, easier to produce in large quantities. The best modern cold weather gear can match or exceed traditional materials in some ways. But something is lost. The connection to animals and ancestors. The skill that took years to develop. The meaning embedded in every stitch. The identity expressed in every decoration. Modern clothing is anonymous, factory-made, functional, but soulless. Akulina's clothing was alive with meaning. Each garment told a story, carried a history, connected her to something larger than herself. She kept her mother's coat until it fell apart. Long after she had her own coats she had made herself. She kept her mother's coat hanging in her house. Sometimes she would touch it, feel the patterns her mother's hands had created, remember the warmth it had once provided. When the fur finally disintegrated, when the hide crumbled beyond repair, she mourned it like she mourned a friend. Objects carried meaning in her world, carried connection, carried the presence of those who had made them. This is what we have lost in the age of disposable goods. The relationship with objects that lasts generations. The meaning that accumulates in things made with care. The gratitude for what keeps us alive. Akulina knew exactly what her clothing cost. The animals that died, the hours of labor, the skills refined over lifetimes. She did not take it for granted. She could not take it for granted. And perhaps this knowing, this gratitude, was part of what made her happy in conditions that seem only to offer hardship. The cold that threatened life also preserved it. This was one of the great paradoxes of Yakutian existence. The same temperatures that could kill you in minutes, could keep food fresh for months, could preserve meat through the long winter when hunting was impossible, could turn the entire landscape into a natural freezer. Akulina understood this from childhood. In autumn, when the temperatures first dropped below freezing and stayed there, the whole village worked to prepare the winter stores. Fish caught from the rivers were cleaned and laid out to freeze solid within hours. Horse meat and reindeer meat were butchered and frozen in quarters. Berries picked in summer were packed in birch bark containers and left outside to preserve. By the time deep winter arrived, the village was surrounded by food, frozen solid, safe from decay, waiting to sustain them through the months of darkness and cold. The Yakut people had a word for this frozen meat, stroganina. To eat it, you did not cook it. You took a frozen piece, solid as wood, and shaved thin slices from it with a sharp knife. The shavings curled like ribbons, translucent and delicate, and you ate them immediately before they could warm.
In your mouth, the frozen meat dissolved, releasing its flavor as your body heat thawed it. It was delicious in a way that cooked meat rarely matched. And it was nutritious, the freezing process, preserving vitamins that cooking would have destroyed. Akulina ate stroganina all through her winters, shaving frozen fish at her table, the ice crystals catching the lamplight as they fell, a mundane miracle that modern refrigeration has made us forget how to appreciate. But water was a different matter. In Yakutia, water does not flow in winter. Rivers freeze solid. From surface to bottom in some places, wells freeze, pipes, if they existed, would freeze and burst. To have water, you had to make it from ice or snow. Every day in winter, someone had to venture out to collect ice, to bring it back to the house, to melt it over the stove. The best ice came from rivers. Lake ice worked too, but river ice was cleaner, clearer, with fewer impurities. Akulina would take a special tool, a long iron pick, and chip blocks of ice from the frozen river. Each block weighed many kilograms. She loaded them onto a small sled, dragged them back to the house, stacked them near the stove to melt. A day's worth of water for a family might require an hour of work. Trip after trip, block after block, all before any of the other daily tasks could begin. Perhaps you have turned on a faucet, watched clean water flow, and felt nothing in particular about it. Akulina never took water for granted. She had earned every drop, every sip of tea, every bowl of soup. With labor in the cold, she knew exactly what water cost. This knowing did not make her bitter, it made her grateful. Every warm cup she held was a small victory over the winter, a proof that she was still here, still capable, still alive. The animals were partners, not possessions. The Yakut people kept horses, a special breed adapted over centuries to the extreme cold. Yakutian horses were small and sturdy, with thick coats that grew inches long in winter. They could dig through snow to find grass, could survive temperatures that would kill horses from warmer climates. Without horses, life in Yakutia would have been nearly impossible. They provided transportation across distances too far to walk. They provided meat and milk. Their hides became clothing and shelter coverings. Even their manure was valuable, dried and used as fuel when wood was scarce. Akulina grew up with horses the way children in other places grow up with dogs or cats. She knew each animal by name, by personality, by the particular sound of its breathing in the cold morning air. But the horses needed care. In winter, they needed to be sheltered from the worst of the cold. Not in heated barns, which would have been impossible to maintain, but in simple structures that blocked the wind, that allowed the horse's own body heat to accumulate. They needed to be checked daily for frostbite on their ears and noses, for ice building up in their manes, for any sign of illness that the cold could quickly make fatal. Akulina would spend part of each winter day with the horses, talking to them, running her hands along their thick coats, making sure they were healthy, making sure they would still be there when spring finally came. The reindeer were different. Some Yakut families kept domesticated reindeer, using them as the nomadic peoples to the north did for transport and food and hides. But many families relied instead on wild reindeer, vast herds that migrated through the region, following patterns established over thousands of years. Hunting these herds was not simple predation. It was participation in a relationship that had sustained the Yakut people since before memory. You took what you needed, you did not waste. You honored the animal that gave its life so that you could continue yours. Akulina remembered her father hunting, returning with meat that would feed the family for weeks, the careful rituals of thanks that followed every successful hunt, the understanding that life was given, not taken, even when it was taken with a spear or a bullet. If you have ever felt gratitude for a meal, if you have ever paused before eating to recognize where your food came from, you have touched something of what Akulina felt constantly, the awareness that survival was not guaranteed, that everything that sustained you had a cost, that the proper response to receiving life was gratitude. The daily rhythm of winter was shaped by light, or rather, by the absence of light. In December, depths of winter, the sun barely rose in Yakutia. In the northernmost villages, it did not rise at all. Just a dim glow on the southern horizon for a few hours. Then darkness again. This darkness was not like the darkness you know. It was complete, absolute, unbroken, except by fire and lamp and the faint shimmer of aurora overhead. Akulina's days were shaped around what light there was. She woke before dawn, if dawn was coming at all. She worked during the brightest hours, doing whatever tasks required seeing. Outside work was time to maximize the dim light. Inside work continued by lamplight, by the glow of the stove. By afternoon, what passed for day was ending. The darkness crept back, and the family drew together around the warmth and light of the fire. Blue evenings. The evenings were for stories. In the long dark hours with nowhere to go and nothing to see outside, the Yakut people told stories, epic tales that could take many nights to complete. Stories of heroes and spirits and animals that spoke, stories that carried the wisdom of the ancestors, the history of the people, the understanding of the world that had accumulated over generations. Akulina learned these stories as a child, listening in the firelight, watching the faces of the elders as they spoke. She carried them through her whole life, and in her old age, she became the one who told them, passing forward what had been passed to her. Perhaps you have gathered with family in the evening. Perhaps you have sat together as darkness fell outside, sharing stories or silence or simple presence. If so, you understand something of those Yakutian evenings. The warmth of company in the cold, the way that light and fire become more precious when darkness presses in from all sides, the comfort of voices in the night. But Akulina was not always comfortable. There were nights when the cold found its way in, when the fire burned low and the temperature dropped and sleep came hard. There were days when the food ran short, when the stored supplies dwindled faster than expected, when hunger became a companion. There were years when sickness swept through the village, when the isolation that protected them from some diseases left them vulnerable to others, when burial was impossible because the ground was frozen solid and the dead had to wait until spring. Place, she knew suffering. She knew loss. She knew fear. But she also knew that suffering was not the whole of life. That loss was balanced by love. That fear could coexist with courage. The cold did not make her hard. It made her wise. Let that wisdom settle into you now. The understanding that difficulty does not mean despair, that hardship does not preclude happiness, that a life of challenges can still be a life of meaning. Akulina knew this in her bones, in her body, in every breath she took of air cold enough to freeze, and somehow, she was grateful for the life she had, grateful even for the cold that had shaped her, that had made her who she was. The Yakut diet was shaped entirely by the cold, what people ate in temperate climates, grains and vegetables and fruits. These barely existed in traditional Yakutian life. The growing season was too short, the cold too intense. The land demanded a different approach to nutrition, and the body demanded it too. In extreme cold, the human body burns calories at an astonishing rate. Just staying warm requires energy. The heart works harder. The metabolism accelerates. Muscles shiver constantly, even when you do not notice, generating heat through motion. A person in -50 needs 2 or 3 times the calories they would need in temperate weather, and not just any calories. Fat calories, dense, slow burning, capable of sustaining the body through long, cold nights. The traditional Yakut diet provided exactly what the cold demanded. Fish was the foundation. The rivers of Yakutia teemed with fish, salmon and grayling and pike, and many others. In summer, they were caught in enormous quantities, dried on racks in the endless daylight, smoked over careful fires, frozen in autumn to last through winter. Akulina ate fish nearly every day of her life. In summer, fresh from the river; in winter, frozen and sliced thin, or thawed and cooked into soups. The fish provided protein but also fat. The oily flesh of northern fish, adapted to cold waters, contained exactly the fats that human bodies needed to survive Yakutian winters. Horse meat was sacred. The Yakut people had a special relationship with horses, as we have seen, but horses were also food, important food, essential food. Horse meat was fatty in a particular way. The fat was distributed through the muscle, not collected in layers like beef or pork. This made it tender, flavorful, easy to digest, and there was horse fat itself, pure white, almost sweet, eaten in chunks during the coldest weather, providing the concentrated calories that nothing else could match. Akulina remembered eating raw horse fat as a child. The way it melted on the tongue, the warmth that spread through the body, the satisfaction that no other food provided. To modern ears, this sounds unhealthy. We have been taught to fear fat, to limit it, to consider it the enemy of health, but in Yakutian conditions, fat was life. Without it, survival was impossible. The body needed what the body needed, and what it needed was fat. The fermented foods were crucial. Without refrigeration, preservation depended on other methods. Drying worked in summer, freezing worked in winter, but fermentation worked year-round, and it provided something else that cold climates demanded. Fermented mare's milk, called kumis, was a staple, slightly alcoholic, fizzy with active cultures. It provided nutrition that fresh milk could not. The fermentation process created vitamins, particularly the B vitamins that the body needed, but the traditional diet otherwise lacked. Fermented fish was also common, buried in the ground, allowed to transform over months, developing flavors that outsiders found overwhelming, but Yakut people considered delicious. These fermented foods were not just preservation, they were nutrition in its most bioavailable form. The bacteria had pre-digested the food, making its nutrients easier to absorb, providing probiotics that kept the gut healthy in conditions that would otherwise challenge it. Perhaps you have eaten fermented food, yogurt or kimchi or sauerkraut. If so, you have tasted something of what Akulina knew as ordinary. The tang of transformation, the alive quality of food that is still changing, the depth of flavor that only fermentation creates. Blood was not wasted. When animals were slaughtered, the blood was collected carefully. Bug. It was cooked into sausages, frozen into blocks to be thawed later, mixed with fat and grains when grains were available. Blood is one of the most nutritious foods available, rich in iron and protein, in vitamins and minerals that are hard to find elsewhere. The Yakut people understood this intuitively. Even without modern nutritional science to explain it, Akulina drank blood soup regularly. The hot liquid warming her from inside, the iron strengthening her blood, the nutrition sustaining her through the endless cold. The organs were prized, liver and kidney and heart. These were not discards, they were treasures, the most nutritious parts of any animal, reserved for those who needed them most, the very young and very old. Akulina remembered her grandmother giving her liver, making sure she ate every bite. This was not punishment. It was love expressed through nutrition, ensuring the child had what she needed to grow strong. In her own old age, she received the same treatment, the liver portions set aside for her, the recognition that her body needed what organs provided. The cooking methods mattered. Most food was not cooked the way modern people cook. Boiling was common because it was efficient and preserved nutrients in the broth. Frying was rare because fat was too precious to use as a cooking medium. And much food was eaten raw. The stroganina we mentioned before, raw frozen fish or meat, was not just tradition. It was nutrition, the freezing preserved vitamins that cooking would have destroyed. The raw state provided nutrients in their natural form. Akulina preferred her fish raw and frozen, the taste she had known since childhood, the texture she had learned to love, the nutrition her body recognized and craved. This diet sounds strange to modern ears. Fat and raw meat and blood and fermented fish. It sounds primitive, unhealthy, the diet of people who did not know better. But consider, the Yakut people survived for thousands of years in conditions that modern people cannot imagine. They raised families, built cultures, lived into old age. They did not suffer the chronic diseases that plague modern populations. Heart disease and diabetes and obesity, their diet was perfectly adapted to their conditions. It provided exactly what their bodies needed. Nothing more, nothing less. The modern diet, with its processed foods and added sugars, its agricultural abundance and industrial production, this diet is the experiment. The Yakut diet was the proven solution, tested over millennia, refined by necessity. Akulina did not think of her food as a diet. She thought of it as eating, simply eating what was, what had always been eaten, what tasted good and kept you alive. The complicated thinking about nutrition, the counting and measuring and worrying, this would have puzzled her. You ate what there was. You were grateful for it. Your body told you what it needed. And you listened. This simplicity is perhaps the greatest lesson. The body knows, if we let it know, the wisdom of hunger and satisfaction, of craving and fullness, has guided human nutrition for millions of years. We have complicated it unnecessarily, and we have not become healthier for our complications. The Yakut horse is one of the most remarkable animals on earth, descended from horses that came with migrating peoples thousands of years ago. It has adapted to conditions that would kill any other breed. It survives temperatures that freeze other horses solid. It finds food beneath snow that would starve other animals. It exists in partnership with humans in ways that go beyond mere domestication. Akulina grew up with these horses, and they shaped her life as much as the cold itself. The Yakut horse is small, sturdy rather than elegant, with short legs and a compact body that minimizes heat loss. Its coat grows thick in winter, sometimes reaching 15 centimeters, creating a layer of insulation that traps air and holds warmth. The horses do not shiver the way other breeds do. Their metabolism adjusts to the cold, slowing in winter, conserving energy for the essential task of staying alive. They enter a kind of semi-hibernation, active but reduced, waiting for spring with patient endurance. They can survive on almost nothing, digging through snow to reach the dried grass beneath, eating bark and twigs when grass is unavailable, extracting nutrition from materials that other horses would not recognize as food. In the deepest cold, they stand together, facing inward, creating a circle of shared warmth, each horse's breath warming the others, each body contributing to the collective survival. Akulina's first memory of horses was warmth. Her mother placed her against a horse's side when she was very small, the great body radiating heat, the thick fur soft against her face, the steady heartbeat like a drum in the darkness. She learned that horses were safety, that their presence meant survival was possible, that caring for them was caring for yourself. The bond between Yakut people and their horses goes beyond utility. The horses are named, their personalities are known. Their preferences and fears are respected. They are members of the family in ways that livestock in other cultures rarely achieve. Akulina knew each horse in her family's herd. She knew which one would startle at sudden movements, which one would come when called, which one was brave, and which one was cautious. She talked to them not because she believed they understood her words, but because talking was part of relationship, part of the acknowledgement that they were beings, not things. The work of caring for horses in winter was demanding. They needed shelter, not heated buildings, but structures that blocked the wind, that allowed their own heat to accumulate, that protected them from the worst of the storms. They needed to be checked daily, their ears and noses examined for frostbite, their coats checked for ice accumulation, their hooves inspected for cracks from the frozen ground. Water was a particular challenge. Horses need to drink even in winter, and providing unfrozen water required constant effort. Chopping through ice on water sources, bringing heated water from the house, making sure each animal drank enough to stay healthy. This work continued regardless of weather, in -40, in -50, in conditions that made every step outside an act of will. The horses still needed care. If you have ever been responsible for another living creature, if you have ever had to care for something that depended completely on you, you understand something of what Akulina felt toward her horses. The weight of responsibility, the reward of relationship, the way that caring for others gives meaning to our own lives. The horses gave back what they received. They carried people across distances too far to walk. In conditions where walking would mean death from exposure, the horses made travel possible. They pulled sleds loaded with supplies, with firewood, with the materials of survival. Their strength multiplied what human beings could accomplish. They provided food when other food ran short. This was not betrayal of the relationship. It was part of it. The understanding that life feeds on life. That death is part of the cycle. That gratitude encompasses even the hardest necessities. And they provided companionship in the isolation of Yakutian winter. With villages separated by vast distances, with families spending months seeing no one outside their own household, the horses were company, warm, breathing presences, beings with whom you could share the long, cold nights. Akulini's favorite horse was named Seren. She was a mare, small even by Yakut standards, with a coat that turned almost white in winter. She was stubborn and gentle, would refuse to cross ice she considered unsafe, but would stand motionless for hours while children climbed on her back. Seren lived to be very old. Old for a horse, more than 30 years. She and Akulina grew old together, two females who had survived what should have killed them, who had become wise in ways that only survival teaches. When Seren finally died, Akulina mourned her as she would mourn a friend. The mare was buried according to the old customs, with respect, with ceremony, with gratitude for all the years of partnership. The modern world is losing this relationship. Horses are becoming rare in Yakutia, replaced by trucks and snowmobiles, by machines that do not require feeding, that do not need to be checked in the night, that do not offer warmth or companionship. The efficiency cannot be denied. Machines are more reliable, more powerful, more convenient in every practical way. But something is lost. The relationship that taught responsibility, the partnership that demonstrated interdependence, the warmth of a living creature against your body on the coldest nights. Machines do not teach what horses taught. They serve without relationship. They function without love. They are useful, but not wise. Akulina watched this change with sadness she did not fully express. She understood progress, understood that the world moved on, understood that her grandchildren would live differently than she had lived. But she grieved for the horses, for the relationship that was fading, for the wisdom that the horses carried, wisdom about partnership and survival, and the value of another beating heart. Let the image of those horses rest in your mind. The thick coats, the patient eyes, the warmth they shared with the humans who depended on them. They were partners in survival, proof that we are not alone, that other species can share our burdens and lighten our loads. We are all animals together in the cold and the dark, finding warmth where we can, finding companionship, finding ways to continue. Spring came slowly to Yakutia. You did not wake one morning to find winter gone. Instead, you noticed small changes accumulated over weeks. The sun rose a little higher each day, stayed a little longer. The darkness that had pressed in for months began to retreat. The ice on the rivers groaned and cracked. Long before it actually broke, you could hear the winter dying, a process that took its time, that would not be rushed. And then, sometime in May or June, the ice gave way. Akulina remembered the sound of ice breakup as one of the most beautiful sounds she knew. A roar like thunder, but sustained for hours as the frozen surface of the river shattered into pieces, the chunks of ice piled against each other, beauty, grinding and crashing, creating a chaos of white and water, and then flow, the river running again, water moving, after months of stillness, life returning to the land. Spring was sudden and overwhelming. Once the ice broke, everything changed at once. Flowers bloomed within weeks of snow disappearing, grass shot up, birds returned in great flocks. The world that had been silent and white exploded into color and sound. The short Yakutian summer was a kind of frenzy. Everything had to be done in the brief window of warmth. Hunting, fishing, gathering, repairing buildings, making tools, preparing for the next winter. Akulina worked harder in summer than in winter. The long days, with sun that barely set, allowed work to continue almost around the clock. Sleep came in short bursts when exhaustion demanded it. But there was also joy in summer, the relief of warmth after months of cold, the pleasure of walking without heavy furs, the taste of fresh food after months of frozen stores. The summer celebrations were elaborate. Weddings were held. Families gathered from distant villages. Competitions tested strength and skill. Music and dancing filled the endless daylight. Akulina met her husband at a summer gathering. A young man from a village 2 days' ride away. They danced together as the sun circled the horizon without setting. And by autumn, they were married. If you have ever experienced the return of warmth after cold, if you have ever felt your whole body relax as winter finally releases its grip, you understand something of what summer meant in Yakutia. Not just a season, but a reprieve, a reward, a reminder that the cold was not eternal, even when it felt that way. Autumn was for preparation. The frenzy of summer shifted into the focused work of readying for winter. Every day brought the temperature a little lower. Every night lasted a little longer. The urgency was real, but not panicked. They had done this before. They knew what was needed. Meat was dried and frozen. Fish were preserved. Berries and roots were stored. Wood was cut and stacked. Buildings were inspected and repaired. Clothing was mended or made new. By the time the first deep freeze arrived, the village was ready, prepared not just for survival, but for the particular kind of living that winter demanded. Akulina knew exactly when winter had truly arrived, not by the temperature, which had been cold for weeks, but by the quality of the silence, a certain stillness that settled over everything when the cold reached its full depth. That silence was a signal. The long night had begun. Now was the time for endurance, for patience, for the slow, steady work of surviving until spring. The cycle repeated year after year. Decade after decade, Akulina lived through it 73 times, each winter different in its particulars, but the same in its essence. Each spring a miracle she never stopped appreciating. Each summer a burst of life and work. Each autumn a preparation for what was coming. The repetition was not monotony, it was rhythm. The rhythm of a life lived in close partnership with the natural world. A rhythm that modern life has largely abandoned, but that human beings followed for most of our existence as a species. The community was essential. No one survived Yakutian winters alone. The tasks were too many, the risks too great, the isolation too heavy for any individual to bear. The village was the unit of survival. Families helped families, resources were shared when sharing was necessary. The welfare of each was bound to the welfare of all. If a family lost their food stores to accident or bad luck, other families contributed. If someone was sick and could not work, others did their tasks. If a house caught fire, destroying everything, the whole village worked to rebuild. This was not idealism. It was practical necessity. In an environment that could kill you in minutes, you could not afford to let your neighbors fail. Their failure might become yours. Their survival supported your survival. Akulina understood this without thinking about it. The way you understand that you need to breathe, helping others, was not virtue in her world. It was common sense. Perhaps you have experienced community in this way. Perhaps you have lived somewhere where neighbors actually depended on each other, where helping was not charity but mutual survival. If so, you understand something precious that many people have lost: the security of knowing you are not alone, the obligation of knowing others count on you, the deep human connection that comes from shared struggle. But the communities can also be difficult. When everyone knows everyone, when privacy is limited, when the same people surround you year after year, conflicts arise. But grudges form, Old wounds fester. Akolina learned to navigate this too. The art of letting small things go. The skill of apologizing even when you thought you were right. The wisdom of maintaining peace because the alternative was too costly. In a heated city apartment, you can fight with your neighbor and never see them again. In a Yakutian village, you had to live with the consequences of every conflict. The cold demanded cooperation, even from people who did not like each other. The cold taught lessons that warmth cannot. It taught patience because hurrying could kill you. It taught attention because inattention could kill you. It taught respect because disrespecting the cold could kill you. It taught the value of what you have because losing it meant losing your life. It taught gratitude because every day of survival was a gift. These were not lessons Akolina sat down to learn. They were absorbed through living, built into every action, every habit, every choice. By the time she was old, she carried these lessons in her body. They were part of who she was, inseparable from her sense of self. The cold also taught a kind of peace. When you have faced temperatures that can kill you, when you have looked out at landscapes that are beautiful and deadly in equal measure, something shifts inside you. The small worries fall away. The anxieties that plague people in comfortable lives seem less urgent, and you stop wasting energy on what does not. Akolina had this peace. It showed in her face, in her voice, in the steadiness of her movements. She was not free from trouble, but she was not controlled by it either. If it will, the understanding that you have already survived, that you are here, that whatever challenges you face, you have the capacity to meet them. This is what the cold taught Akolina. This is what she carried through her life. And this is what we carry too, if we remember, if we let ourselves feel it. The Yakut people did not see themselves as alone in the world. The land was alive with spirits, beings that inhabited trees and rivers and mountains, powers that could help or harm depending on how they were treated. This was not superstition to Akolina. It was simply how the world worked, as real as the cold itself, as practical as knowing how to start a fire. The spirits of the land required respect. When you took something from the land, you acknowledged the taking. You offered thanks. You recognized that you were in relationship, not simply extracting resources. Before a hunt, offerings were made, words were spoken to the spirits of the animals, not to control them, but to ask permission, to express gratitude in advance for what might be given. When a tree was cut for firewood, the spirit of the tree was addressed. A small offering might be left at the stump. The tree was thanked for its gift of warmth. Practices might seem quaint to modern minds, remnants of a primitive worldview, superstitions that science has superseded. But Akolina would not have understood this dismissal. What she understood was relationship. The land was not a thing to be used. It was a community to which she belonged. The spirits were not imaginary. They were the living presence of the world around her. When you live in close relationship with an environment that can kill you, you develop a different kind of awareness. The land becomes alive in ways that people in controlled environments never experience pass. Buh. The sounds of the forest at night, the movement of animals in the distance, the shift of weather that you feel before you see, these become communications. messages from a world that is paying attention to you, even as you pay attention to it. Whether you call this spirits or ecology or simply awareness, the experience is the same. The world is alive, and you are part of it. The shamans served as intermediaries. Not everyone could communicate directly with the spirits. Some people had special abilities, special training, special calling. These became the shamans, the ones who could travel between worlds, who could intercede when things went wrong. Akulamina was not a shaman, but she knew them, consulted them when illness struck or luck ran bad, participated in ceremonies that maintained the balance between human and spirit worlds. The drums would sound in the darkness. The shaman would dance and chant, entering trance, traveling to places ordinary people could not go, returning with knowledge or healing or warnings. These ceremonies were not entertainment. They were essential maintenance of the cosmic order, like repairing a house before winter, like preparing food stores for the long, cold, necessary work that kept everything functioning. The seasons had spiritual dimensions. Winter was not just cold, it was a time when certain spirits were more active, when the boundaries between worlds grew thin, when the dead might walk more freely. Summer was a time of abundance, not just materially, but spiritually. The long days brought light into all the dark corners. The spirits of growth and fertility were honored. The world was renewed. Each transition required its ceremonies, its acknowledgments, its adjustments in behavior and attitude. Akulina marked these transitions even into her old age. Even as the official ceremonies faded, she maintained her own practices. Her private acknowledgments of the spirits that had accompanied her through 73 years. Perhaps you have felt something like this, a sense of presence in nature, a feeling that you are being watched, that you are in relationship with something larger than yourself. If so, you have touched what Akulina knew directly, the aliveness of the world. The awareness that permeates everything, the spirits that live in the spaces between. Modern science might explain these feelings as psychological projections, as the brain's pattern making applied to random stimuli, as remnants of evolutionary adaptations that no longer serve their original purpose. But the feelings remain, and perhaps the explanations matter less than the experience itself. The cold had its own spirit, not a personal god, but a presence, a force that demanded acknowledgement. That would not be ignored. You did not fight the cold spirit, you negotiated with it, you showed it respect. You adapted yourself to its demands rather than demanding it adapt to you. This was perhaps the most fundamental teaching of Yakutian spirituality: humility before forces larger than yourself, respect for what you cannot control, adaptation rather than domination. Akulina carried this teaching into every aspect of her life, not just in winter, but in dealing with people, with circumstances, with the inevitable disappointments and losses that life brings. You cannot force the world to be other than it is. You can only find your place within it. This was the cold's teaching, and the spirit's teaching, and the truth that shaped her approach to everything. The ancestors were always present, not ghosts exactly, but continuing members of the community whose voices could still be heard, whose wisdom still guided. When Akulina faced a difficult decision, she would sometimes ask her grandmother, who had been dead for decades, speaking quietly in the old way. listening for an answer that might come, as intuition, as dream, as sudden clarity. She did not think of this as talking to the dead. She thought of it as maintaining relationship, as honoring the connection that death had not severed, as drawing on wisdom that did not end with the body. The boundary between living and dead was thin in her world, more permeable than modern people imagine. The ancestors were not gone. They were simply in a different room of the same house. These beliefs are fading. Now, the young people learn science in school. They learn to explain the world in material terms. The spirits become metaphors, then memories, then nothing at all. Akulina did not try to convince them otherwise. She knew that each generation finds its own way, that beliefs change as circumstances change, that the spirits would remain whether people acknowledged them or not. But she wondered what would replace them. When you lose the sense of relationship with the land, what keeps you from destroying it? When you lose the presence of ancestors, what connects you to the past? When you lose the spirits, what remains beyond the material? These were not questions she could answer, only questions she carried, as she carried so much else, into the long nights of her final winters. The stories told in Yakutian firelight were unlike any stories you have heard. They were called Oymyakon, epic poems that could take many nights to complete. Some stretched to tens of thousands of lines, requiring weeks of evening tellings to reach their end. These were not entertainments in the modern sense. They were education, history, philosophy, identity, all woven into narrative form. The heroes of Oymyakon were extraordinary beings. They lived in a world of 3 levels. The upper world where benevolent spirits dwelled. The middle world where humans lived. The lower world where dark forces waited. The heroes traveled between these worlds, fought monsters and demons, rescued the innocent, restored balance when it had been disturbed. Their adventures were dramatic, filled with magic and transformation, but always ultimately about the struggle between good and evil, order and chaos. Akulina learned these stories as a child, sitting in the darkness as the fire crackled, listening to the voices of elders who knew every word, every phrase, every subtle intonation. The stories became part of her. Their heroes became her companions. Their lessons became her understanding of how the world worked. The telling was an art form. The Oymyakon singers, called Oymyakon suits, trained for years to master their craft. They memorized not just the words, but the melodies that accompanied them, the rhythms that carried the meaning, the gestures that illustrated the action. A skilled Oymyakon suit could hold an audience for hours, could make them feel the cold of the upper world and the heat of the lower. It'd bring tears and laughter and terror all in a single evening. The best were famous throughout the region, traveled from village to village, welcomed wherever they went, valued as carriers of a tradition that reached back into unknowable time. Akulina's grandmother was an Oymyakon suit, not one of the famous ones who traveled, but skilled enough to tell the stories in her own home, to pass them to her children and grandchildren, to keep the tradition alive in one small corner of the world. Akulina remembered the way her grandmother's voice changed when she began to tell, how she seemed to become someone else, larger, older, connected to something beyond herself. The stories flowed through her grandmother, not from her. The grandmother was a channel, a vessel, a living link to ancestors who had told these same stories centuries before. Perhaps you have experienced something similar. Perhaps you have heard a story told by someone who truly knew how to tell it, whose voice carried you away from where you were, whose words created worlds you could see and feel. If so, you understand something of what those Yakutian evenings offered. The escape from winter's grip, even while winter held you tight. The travel to other places, even while you sat by the fire. The companionship of heroes, even while you were surrounded only by family. The stories also carried practical knowledge. Woven into the heroic narratives were lessons about survival, about the land, about how to behave in various circumstances. The hero who crossed a frozen river would demonstrate proper ice reading technique. The heroine who dressed for a journey would teach the layers of clothing. The wise elder who advised the protagonist would share knowledge about weather, about animals, about the spirits. Children absorbed these lessons without knowing they were being taught. The entertainment carried education, the pleasure carried purpose. This is perhaps the genius of oral tradition, learning hidden within story, knowledge transmitted through narrative, the important things remembered because they were wrapped in tales worth remembering. The shorter stories were told more often. Folk tales and legends, animal fables, funny stories about tricksters and fools, these could be told in a single evening, could be requested by name, could be adapted to the audience. There were stories about ravens, clever and mischievous, always getting into trouble. These made the children laugh and taught them about the consequences of cleverness without wisdom. There were stories about wolves, fierce but honorable, dangerous but predictable. These taught respect for the hunters who shared the land, and practical knowledge about their behavior. There were stories about girls who became birds, boys who became bears, transformations that spoke to the fluid boundary between human and animal in Yakut understanding. Akolina knew hundreds of these stories. They accumulated over her lifetime, heard from grandmothers and parents, from visiting relatives and traveling strangers. Each one found a place in her memory, waiting to be retrieved when the occasion required. When her own grandchildren visited, she would tell them the stories she had been told, watching their faces in the firelight, seeing the same wonder she had felt, passing forward what had been passed to her. The stories are fading now. Television came to the villages, then internet. Entertainment that requires no human teller, that comes from screens rather than faces, that is the same everywhere rather than particular to each place. The young people do not learn the alonko. The hours required for memorization are spent on other things. The tradition that sustained Yakut culture for millennia is disappearing in a single generation. UNESCO has declared alonko a masterpiece of intangible heritage. Scholars record the remaining alonko suits, preserve what can be preserved, write down what was meant to be spoken, but something is lost in the writing, the living transmission, the presence of the teller, the community gathered in darkness, fire crackling as the story unfolds. These cannot be captured in text, cannot be preserved in archives. Bäh! Akuliana grieved for this loss. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way, she grieved for all the losses of her long life. She understood that the world changed, that each generation found its own ways, that holding too tightly to the past was its own kind of failure. But she also understood that something precious was being lost, knowledge that had served her people for thousands of years, beauty that would never exist in quite the same way again. She told the stories when she could, to whoever would listen, for as long as she was able.
And when her voice finally fell silent, some of the stories fell silent with her.
Gone forever, like breath into frozen air. Let the stories rest now. The heroes of Oymyakon have completed their journeys. The tellers have spoken their last words. What remains is memory, and even memory fades. But something persists. The human need for story, the hunger for narrative, the way that tales carry truth in forms we can remember. This does not die. This cannot die. It finds new forms, new channels, new ways to flow from mind to mind, even now, as you listen to this story about a woman who lived far away. The ancient tradition continues. A voice in the darkness, carrying meaning through the night. The knowledge that kept Akulina alive was not written in any book. It lived in the bodies of those who knew, in the hands that had done the work, in the eyes that had learned to see, in the ears that had learned to hear. It was passed down through watching, through doing, through the patient correction of elders who had learned it the same way, and it was detailed beyond what you might expect. Consider the fire. Anyone can start a fire, but starting a fire in Yakutian winter is different. The wood may be frozen solid, the air is so dry that sparks behave differently. The cold steals heat faster than you can produce it. Akulina knew exactly which types of wood burned best in extreme cold, which caught flame quickly and which burned long, which produced the most heat for the least smoke, which should never be burned inside because the frozen sap would pop and throw sparks. She knew how to arrange kindling when her fingers were too cold to feel properly, how to coax a flame when the wind was stealing her matches' heat before they could ignite, how to keep a fire burning through the night without getting up, without letting it die, without burning the house down. This was not one skill. It was dozens of micro skills accumulated over a lifetime, each one learned through experience, through failure, through the patient teaching of those who had learned before. Consider the ice. Akulina could look at a frozen river and know things that you would never see. She could tell by the color of the ice how thick it was, how safe for crossing. White ice was weakest, filled with air bubbles. Blue ice was strongest. Dense and solid, gray ice was unpredictable, sometimes safe, sometimes deadly. She could hear the ice speaking. The creaks and groans told her whether it was settling, strengthening, or preparing to crack. She knew which sounds meant stay away and which meant safe passage. She knew that new ice was more dangerous than old ice, that ice near moving water was always weaker, that springs bubbling up from below could create thin spots in what looked like solid surface. People who had not learned, or who had forgotten, or who had taken chances they should not have taken. The river taught respect. And the lessons could be fatal. Consider the body. Akulina knew the stages of freezing, the way a doctor knows the stages of disease. First came the numbness, the fingers and toes losing feeling. This was not yet dangerous if addressed quickly. Warming the affected parts Restoring circulation prevented any lasting damage. Next came the pain as the cold reached deeper, the skin turning white and waxy. This was frostbite beginning. The tissue was damaged now. Recovery was possible but not certain. Then came the strange warmth, the body giving up its fight, the victim feeling almost comfortable as they froze to death. This was the danger zone, the point at which rescue became critical, where minutes could mean the difference between survival and death. Akulina knew the signs in herself and others. She knew when to stop and rewarm, when to turn back, when to seek shelter immediately. She had pulled people from the brink of freezing, recognizing the signs that they themselves could not feel. If you have ever trusted your body to tell you what it needed, if you have ever felt the wisdom that comes from paying attention to physical sensation, you understand something of this knowledge. The body knows things the mind does not. In extreme environments, that bodily knowledge can save your life. Consider the animals. Akulina could read the behavior of animals to predict weather, to find food, to avoid danger. When the horses grew restless, standing close together, facing the same direction, she knew a storm was coming. When the ravens flew in certain patterns, she knew where food might be found. When the wolves howled in certain ways, he knew to keep the children close. This was not magic. The animals were responding to things they could sense, but she could not. Pressure changes. Distant sounds, scents carried on the wind. By watching them, she could access information beyond her own senses. She had names for different types of storms based on how the animals behaved beforehand. The horse storm, and the raven storm, and the silent storm when even the hardy local birds disappeared. Consider the sky. The northern sky in winter was alive with information. The color of the sunset told her what tomorrow's weather would be. Red meant clear skies coming. Yellow meant clouds. Gray meant snow. The position of the stars told her the time without any clock, the season without any calendar. She navigated by stars on the long winter nights. Finding her way home, when the land was featureless white under endless black, the aurora borealis was not just beautiful to her, it was communication, the spirits speaking, or the weather changing. Or both. Different colors and shapes meant different things, though she would not explain all of them to outsiders. This is what accumulated knowledge looks like. Not facts in a book, not instructions you can look up, but a deep integration of information and intuition built over a lifetime, inherited from generations before. Akulina did not think of herself as especially knowledgeable. She had simply absorbed what everyone in her community knew, what everyone needed to know to survive. But by the standards of modern life, her knowledge was extraordinary, a library of survival wisdom that no university teaches, that no book can fully capture. The tragedy is that much of this knowledge is disappearing, as the old ways give way to modern conveniences. As young people move to cities with heated apartments and grocery stores, the chain of transmission breaks. Akulina's grandchildren know less than she knew, her great-grandchildren know less still. Each generation loses something, not because they do not care, but because they do not need it the same way. The knowledge that kept people alive for thousands of years, fading in a few decades. But here is what survives, not the specific skills, necessarily, Those can be relearned if they become necessary again. What survives is deeper. The understanding that humans can adapt to almost anything. The proof that our species is not as fragile as we sometimes feel. The demonstration that comfort is not the same as capability. Akulina was proof that we are stronger than we know. Let that proof rest in you. The evidence of human resilience, carried in the story of one woman who should not have survived, but did for 73 years, in conditions that seem impossible. If she could do that, perhaps we are capable of more than we believe. Aging. In Yakutia was different from aging in warmer places. The cold did something to bodies, preserved them in some ways, challenged them in others. People who had spent their lives in extreme temperatures often looked older than their years. The sun reflecting off snow created wrinkles. The cold wind dried and toughened skin. The physical labor of survival built muscle but wore down joints. But something else happened too. The elders were strong in ways that surprised outsiders. Their bodies had been trained by decades of challenge, had adapted to conditions that would break softer people. They were not fragile, the way elderly people in comfortable climates sometimes become. Akulina at 73 could still split wood, still haul water, still walk miles through snow if necessary. Not as fast as when she was young, not as far, but still capable, still strong. The community valued its elders. In a culture where knowledge was survival, the people who had the most knowledge were the most valuable. Elders remembered the bad winters, the years when the food ran short, the strategies that had worked and the ones that had failed. They remembered techniques that younger people had never needed to use, but that might become necessary again. They remembered the stories, the histories and myths that held the culture together, the songs that had been sung for generations, the proper ways to address spirits and ancestors. An elder who died was not just a person lost, it was a library burned, a repository of knowledge that could never be replaced. Akulina was one of these living libraries. By her 70s, she had seen everything Yakutian life could offer. She had survived winters that killed others. She had birthed children and buried some of them. She had adapted to changes that would have overwhelmed lesser spirits. When younger people had questions, they came to her. When the village faced decisions, her voice was heard. When children needed teaching, she was the one who taught. This was not power in the way modern societies understand it. She could not command or demand, but she was respected, listened to, valued in a way that elderly people in many cultures are not. If you have ever known an elder whose presence calmed you, whose wisdom helped you, whose existence simply made the world feel more stable, you understand something of what Akulina meant to her community. She was an anchor, a connection to the past that made the present feel less uncertain. But aging in extreme cold also had its difficulties. The body that had served her for decades began to falter. Joints that had moved smoothly now ached in the cold. Eyes that had read the ice and sky now struggled to see clearly. Lungs that had breathed frozen air without complaint now labored in the deepest cold. Tasks that had once been automatic now required effort, attention, sometimes help from others. Akulina did not complain. That was not her way, but she noticed. She felt the distance growing between what she wanted to do and what she could do.
The community responded. As she had helped others when she was strong,
Others now helped her. Grandchildren brought water so she did not have to haul ice. Neighbors checked on her during the coldest nights. The reciprocity that had always defined village life now flowed toward her. This was not charity. It was the natural order, the way things had always been. Those who had given could receive without shame, because they had earned it, because they had been part of the web of mutual support that kept everyone alive. There is something beautiful about aging in community, the knowledge that you will not be abandoned, the trust that those you helped will help you in return, the absence of the loneliness that haunts so many elderly people in modern societies. Akolina was never alone, even in her small house. In the depths of winter, she was connected to everyone who knew her, everyone whose lives had intersected with hers over 7 decades. The cold that isolated also connected, forced people together, made them depend on each other in ways that warmer climates never require. Her husband had died many years before. He had been a good man, steady and kind, partner in the truest sense. They had faced the winters together, raised children together, grown old together, until one winter he did not wake. She had mourned him in the Yakut way, following the rituals that helped the spirit pass on, honoring his memory without clinging to his absence. The winters since had been harder without him. Not just practically, though, that was true, but emotionally. The nights were longer when you could not hear another person breathing. The cold felt colder when there was no warmth beside you. But she had continued. Because that was what you did. Because the alternative was to stop. And she was not ready to stop. Her children had scattered. Some had stayed in the village, continuing the traditional life. Some had moved to cities, to Yakutsk or even Moscow, seeking opportunities that the village could not offer. She did not resent their leaving. The world was changing. Young people had to make their own choices, had to find their own paths. But she missed them. Missed the grandchildren she rarely saw, missed the daily presence of family that had once surrounded her. When they visited in summer, she fed them, held them, stored up memories for the long winters ahead. And when they left, she watched them go, knowing it might be months or years before she saw them again. Perhaps you have felt this distance, the separation from people you love, not through conflict, but through the simple realities of modern life. If so, you understand something of what Akolina carried, the love that does not diminish with distance, the connection that remains even when presence is impossible. In her 70s, Akolina began thinking about her own death, not with fear, exactly, but with awareness. The recognition that she had more winters behind her than ahead, that each spring might be her last. The Yakut traditions around death were elaborate and specific. She knew what she wanted, had told her children, had prepared herself in the ways her own grandmother had taught her. Death was not an enemy to her. It was a transition, a passage to whatever came next. The cold had taught her that endings were natural, that nothing lasted forever, that accepting this was not defeat, but wisdom. She was not in a hurry to die. She still enjoyed her tea in the morning, still appreciated the crack of ice breaking in spring, still found pleasure in the aurora dancing overhead on winter nights. But she was ready in the way that someone who has lived fully can be ready, who has done what she came to do, who has passed on what needed passing. The peace she had found the peace the cold had taught her, included this acceptance, this willingness to let go when the time came. Let that willingness touch you, not as something to fear, but as something to understand. The recognition that every life has its season, that endings are part of the rhythm, that acceptance is not giving up, but growing up. Akulina knew this. She had learned it from the cold, from the cycles of winter and spring, from watching so many others go before her, and she was at peace. The 20th century brought changes that Akulina's grandparents could never have imagined. Electricity came to the village, replacing the oil lamps that had lit winter evenings for centuries. At first, it seemed like magic. Light without fire, brightness without smoke, the darkness pushed back at the flip of a switch. Roads were built, connecting villages that had been isolated except by horse trail. Trucks replaced sleds for heavy hauling. Travel that had taken days now took hours. A school was built where children learned to read and write, not just in Yakut, but in Russian. They learned mathematics and science, history that extended far beyond their village. A world of knowledge their ancestors had never accessed. A clinic arrived with a doctor who visited monthly. Medicines that had not existed became available. Diseases that had been death sentences became treatable. Boo. Akulina watched all of this with mixed feelings. She appreciated the light, the warmth of electric heaters that supplemented the wood stove, the radio that brought voices from distant places into her small house. She appreciated the medicine that had saved her daughter's life when a fever came, the surgery that had fixed her grandson's twisted foot, the vaccinations that had eliminated diseases she remembered from childhood. But she also noticed what was lost. The young people did not know the stories the way she had known them. They had television now. And later, internet. Why listen to an old woman talk when you could watch a screen? The skills that had been essential became optional. Children grew up without learning to read, ice, to start fire in deep cold, to navigate by stars. They did not need to. But Akulina wondered what would happen if they ever did. Biggest change was subtle. The relationship with the land shifted.
In the old days,
You negotiated with the cold. You respected it, accommodated it, arranged your life around its demands. The cold was a presence, a partner, something you lived with rather than against. Modernity changed this. Now you could fight the cold, push it back with insulation and heating, ignore it in ways that had never been possible. The cold became an inconvenience rather than a fundamental condition of life. Akulina was not sure this was better. When you lived with the cold, you developed qualities it demanded: patience, attention, respect for forces larger than yourself. When you fought against it, you might win the battle, but you lost something else. She saw young people who had never truly experienced the cold. They went from heated houses to heated cars to heated schools. They wore modern synthetic clothing that kept them warm without effort. They never had to earn their warmth the way she had earned it. They were softer in ways she could not quite articulate. Not weak exactly, just different. They had not been shaped by the challenge she had faced. They did not have the peace that comes from surviving what seems unsurvivable. Perhaps you have noticed something similar. Perhaps you have seen generations grow up without certain challenges and wondered what they gained and what they lost. This is not nostalgia for hardship. No one wants suffering for its own sake. But there is something to be said for challenge, for difficulty that develops strength, for conditions that demand the best of us. Akulina had been forged by the cold. The younger generations were not forged the same way. What would forge them instead? The traditional knowledge began to fade. The old hunters died, and their specific knowledge died with them. The ways of reading weather and ice and animal behavior, accumulated over centuries, disappeared in decades. The language itself began to change. Russian words crept into Yakut speech. Young people spoke their ancestral language imperfectly or not at all. The old songs became curiosities rather than living traditions. Akulina tried to teach what she knew, but finding students was difficult. The young people had other concerns, other interests. Lives pointed toward futures that did not include the old ways. She understood. She did not blame them, but she grieved. Quietly, for what was being lost, yet something was also gained. Her grandchildren could read, could access knowledge she had never dreamed of. One became a doctor, one an engineer. They had opportunities she had never had. The infant mortality that had been a constant shadow was nearly eliminated. Children survived who would have died in the old days. Mothers survived childbirth in numbers that seemed miraculous compared to her grandmother's time, which had stalked the village in bad years, became rare and then almost unknown. Food could be brought in by truck when local stores ran low. The specter that had haunted her childhood receded into history. These were real gains. She could not regret them. She would not want to return to the time before medicine, before reliable food, before the opportunities her grandchildren enjoyed. Question was not whether change was good or bad. Change was simply change. Neither good nor bad in itself, but carrying both gains and losses. The question was whether you could hold both, the grief for what was lost and the gratitude for what was gained, without letting either one overwhelm the other. Akulina had learned to hold both. In her heart, there was room for sorrow and joy together, for mourning the old ways and celebrating the new. This too was wisdom. The cold had taught her. The world continued to warm. Even in Yakutia, even where winter still meant -50 and below, the old-timers noticed changes. The permafrost that had been solid forever began to shift. Buildings that had stood on frozen ground for generations began to lean and crack. The underground that had been reliable became unpredictable. The seasons arrived differently. Spring came earlier than it used to. Autumn lingered longer. The deep cold that Akulina had known in childhood, the -60 and -70, that had been regular occurrences, came less frequently now. Some of the younger people saw this as improvement. Warmer winters meant easier life, less fuel needed, less hardship. Akulina was not sure. The cold had shaped everything. The culture, the knowledge, the way of being that had defined her people. What would remain if the cold retreated? What would they be without the challenge that had made them who they were? She would not live to see the answer. The changes were slow, measured in decades. She had perhaps 1 decade left, maybe less. But she wondered for her grandchildren, for her great-grandchildren, For all the generations who would come after, would they find their own challenges? Would something else forge them the way the cold had forged her? Would they develop their own wisdom, their own peace? She had to trust that they would. It's a place on earth where nightmares are real. Very places so far that nightmares are real. Her ancestors had come to this frozen land thousands of years ago. They had faced a challenge that seemed impossible, and they had survived, had thrived, had created a culture rich enough to sustain their descendants through millennia. Their descendants would do the same, somehow, in ways she could not predict. This too was the cold's teaching. Trust in the capacity of those who come after. Release the need to control what you cannot control. Accept that the future belongs to the future. There were moments that stayed with her. Small things that had no importance except to her. Bug that she carried through the decades like treasures. The first time she crossed the frozen river by herself. 7 years old, terrified, but determined. Her mother, watching from the shore, the ice solid beneath her feet, the accomplishment glowing in her chest for days afterward. The night her father let her stay up to watch the aurora, standing together in the cold, his arm around her shoulders, the lights dancing green and red across the sky. Beale, part of something vast and beautiful and mysterious. The taste of the first wild strawberry of summer, sweet and small and perfect. Kneeling in the brief grass with her sister, laughing at nothing, at everything, at the simple joy of warmth and sweetness after months of frozen food. These moments accumulated, not the dramatic events that others might remember, not the births and deaths and crises, but the small, beautiful things that made up her life. The way her husband's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of her children's laughter echoing off the snow, the smell of wood smoke that meant home, meant safety, meant warmth waiting. She kept these memories the way some people keep photographs, taking them out to look at in the long winter evenings, letting them warm her from inside when the cold pressed in from all sides. Perhaps you have such moments too. Perhaps there are small treasures in your memory that you return to, that sustain you in ways that bigger events do not. If so, you understand what Akulinia understood, that life is not made of milestones, but of moments, that the small, beautiful things are often the most precious. She remembered the winter she almost died. She was 32, still young and strong, traveling between villages with a group of hunters. A storm came faster than anyone expected, sudden, violent, erasing the world in white. They dug into the snow, made a shelter, huddled together for warmth. The temperature dropped and dropped. -50, -60. Temperatures that killed even the prepared. One of the men died that night. His heart simply stopped. The cold had reached too deep. Akulina felt herself drifting, the strange warmth that meant the body was giving up, the peace that came before death. She wanted to sleep, wanted to let go. But something kept her awake, the thought of her children, waiting at home. The stubborn refusal to die before her time. The lessons of survival drummed into her since birth. She moved. Though moving was agony, she forced herself to stay conscious, forced the others to stay conscious too, talking, singing, pinching each other when sleep threatened. Dawn came, the storm passed. They walked out alive, barely. Changed forever, but alive. That night lived in her body. She could still feel the cold decades later. The particular quality of cold that nearly killed her. The warmth that was not warmth, but death approaching. She had looked into the face of the cold, seeing its true nature. Survived anyway. After that, nothing scared her the same way. She had already faced the worst. Bury everything else was manageable. If you have ever faced something that should have killed you, if you have ever survived what seemed unsurvivable, you understand the strange peace that comes after.
The recalibration of fear, the knowledge that you have already proven your capacity to survive.
She remembered the birth of her first child, the pain that seemed impossible to bear, the fear that something would go wrong, the exhaustion that felt like dying, and then the baby, alive, crying, perfect. Her daughter arrived into the frozen world, breathing air that would have killed someone unprepared. The love that flooded her was like nothing she had felt before. A fierce, protective love, a willingness to do anything at all. To keep this small creature alive, that love never faded. It grew, expanded, included more children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, each one adding to the fire that burned in her heart. That kept her warm through every winter. She remembered her mother's death, the long illness, the slow decline, her mother growing weaker as winter deepened, the knowledge that this was the end, that there was nothing to be done. She sat with her mother through the final night, holding her hand, singing the old songs, the songs her mother had sung to her, the songs her mother's mother had sung when the breath finally stopped. Akulina felt the world shift. She was no longer someone's daughter. She was the elder now, the one who would carry what her mother had carried. It was a weight and a gift, both at once. A responsibility she would carry until her own breath stopped, until she passed the weight to someone else. These memories were her life, not separate from the cold, but woven through it. Every moment touched by the conditions that shaped everything. Every joy and sorrow colored by the world in which it happened. She could not imagine herself without the cold. It was as much a part of her as her own bones. Bah! She had been made by it, refined by it, become who she was through the constant pressure of surviving it. What do we become without challenge? This was a question she wondered about, not with any answer, but with genuine curiosity. The easy life that modernity offered, a comfort that seemed so desirable. What did it make of people? What did it forge them into? She was not judging. She had no right to judge. She had simply lived a different life, under different conditions, and emerged as a different kind of person. Perhaps the modern ones would find their own paths to wisdom, their own challenges to overcome, their own conditions that would forge them into what they needed to be. She hoped so. For their sakes, for the sake of everything that would come after. The cold had been her teacher, harsh but fair, demanding but consistent. Always the same lesson, repeated until she learned. Pay attention. Move slowly. Respect what is larger than you. Take care of each other. Be grateful for warmth. Accept what you cannot change. These lessons served her through every circumstance, not just in winter, but in all the seasons of life, in grief and joy, in success and failure, in everything that arose and passed away. The cold had prepared her for all of it, had given her tools she did not know she was receiving, had made her capable of things she had not yet encountered. This was its gift. Hidden inside the hardship, revealed only when she needed it most. In the end, what did Akulina's life mean? Not to historians, who might never record her name, not to the wider world, which did not know she existed, but to her, to those who loved her, to the place that held her for 73 years. She had survived. That was the first and most fundamental thing in conditions that should have made survival impossible. She had lived fully and completely for more than 7 decades. She had not merely endured. She had found joy, found meaning, found peace, in a place where modern people would see only hardship. This was her testimony, spoken not in words but in the fact of her life itself. Humans are more capable than we know. Comfort is not the same as happiness. Challenge can be a gift if we learn to receive it. She had loved her husband, her children, her grandchildren, the community that had surrounded her through every winter, the land itself, beautiful and deadly in equal measure, bore. She had loved with the fierceness that extreme conditions create, knowing that loss was always possible, that nothing was guaranteed, that every moment together was precious because it might be the last. This love had sustained her through everything, had given her reasons to survive when survival was difficult, had made her life worth living regardless of circumstances. She had passed forward what she received. The knowledge her grandmother had given her, she had given to her own grandchildren. As much as they would take, as much as they could use. The stories that had been told in firelight for centuries, she had told again, keeping them alive for another generation. The way of being in the world that the cold had taught. She had modeled, demonstrated, lived out in front of everyone who knew her. She was a link in a chain that stretched back thousands of years and forward into a future she would not see. She had held the chain, added her link, passed it on. This was enough. This was more than enough. This was everything. Perhaps you wonder what happened to her. Perhaps you want an ending, a conclusion, a final scene. There is no dramatic ending to share. Akulina lived as she had always lived, until she did not. One winter morning, she did not wake. The cold she had negotiated with for 73 years finally claimed her, gently in sleep. She was found by a grandchild who had come to check on her, as someone always came, as the community always watched over its elders. She was buried according to the old customs, as much as they could still be followed. Her body returned to the frozen ground that had shaped her. The mourning was real but not despairing. She had lived fully. She had died peacefully. She had been ready. Her house still stands in a village that still exists, though fewer people live there now than when she was young. Her grandchildren still visit in summer. Sometimes, when they can, they walk the paths she walked. Look at the river she crossed thousands of times. Remember her in the places she loved. The knowledge she carried has largely faded, but something remains. In the people who knew her, in the stories they tell, in the way they carry themselves through their own winters. What remains for us who never knew her? Perhaps only this. The evidence that human beings are extraordinary, not special people, not heroes in any conventional sense, just ordinary people facing extraordinary conditions and finding ways to survive, to thrive, to create lives of meaning and beauty in places that seem to forbid both. Akulina was not unique. There were thousands like her, tens of thousands, ordinary people whose names history did not record, who lived and died in the frozen places of the earth, who proved by their existence what our species is capable of. Their lives are the evidence, their survival is the proof. Their stories, when we can recover them, are gifts from the past. Let that evidence settle into you now. The knowledge that you come from survivors, that your ancestors faced challenges you cannot imagine, that they overcame conditions that would have defeated lesser spirits. Their strength is in you. Their resilience is your inheritance. The capacity that saw them through winters of -70, through famines and plagues and endless hardships, that capacity did not disappear. It waits in you, ready to be called upon, ready to rise when you need it. Sleep comes now, as it came to Akulina on thousands of nights, the darkness settling, the body releasing, the mind letting go of the day's concerns.
You are warm as she was warm in her small house by the stove. You are safe.
As she was safe in the community that surrounded her, you are held. As she was held by the knowledge and love that sustained her. The cold outside cannot reach you tonight. Whatever weather surrounds you, whatever conditions you face, for now, there is only this moment, this warmth, this drift toward rest. Let the frozen landscapes fade. Let the image of Akulina dissolve into comfortable darkness. Let everything you have heard tonight become a foundation beneath your dreams. Not something you need to remember, but something that is simply part of you now. You have traveled far tonight, across the world to the coldest inhabited place on earth, through the life of a woman who should not have survived, but did. Now, the journey is complete. The story is told. What remains is rest. But before you drift away completely, one final thought. If you found yourself moved by human resilience, by the way our ancestors survived conditions that seem impossible, by the wisdom that harsh environments can teach, there is another journey waiting. How Neanderthals survived the Ice Age without freezing to death. Long before Akulina, long before the Yakut people came to Siberia, another group of humans faced the cold, our ancient cousins. The Neanderthals lived through ice ages that made Yakutian winters seem mild. They survived for hundreds of thousands of years without the technologies we take for granted, without the accumulated knowledge of civilizations with only their bodies and their minds and their will to continue. That story connects to this one in ways that run deeper than you might expect. Both are about what humans can endure. Both are about the knowledge that extreme conditions force us to develop. Both are about the cold that shaped who we became. But that is for another night, when you are ready, when the ancient cold calls you back. For now, let sleep take you. You are safe, you are home. Let the cold stay outside, where it belongs. Let the warmth inside grow, spreading through your body, releasing every tension. Every worry, everything that does not serve your rest. Akulina survived, and so will you. Whatever tomorrow brings, you have the capacity to meet it. This is her gift to you. The proof that survival is possible even when it seems impossible. Carry that proof into sleep. Be part of your dreams. Let it be waiting for you when you wake. Good night.